Israel is pressing ahead with its attacks against Hezbollah as its airstrikes against Lebanon's capital, Beirut, continue into another night. The Israeli army says it has now killed some 440 of the militant group's fighters during its ground incursion into Lebanon. This comes as Israel prepares to mark the anniversary of Hamas's terror attacks on October 7th, which sparked its military operations. And it comes as the United Nations Refugee Agency chief, Filippo Grandi, is in Beirut. He said a ceasefire was needed as soon as possible, adding that Lebanon is in a major displacement crisis. Lebanese government officials estimate that 1.2 million people are now displaced. And speaking at a news conference in Beirut, Grandi said the strikes were not legal.
We need respect for civilian infrastructure and civilian population. Unfortunately, many instances of violations of international humanitarian law in the way the airstrikes are conducted that have destroyed or damaged civilian infrastructure.
And we can now speak to Ruth Michaelson, a journalist who is in Beirut. Ruth, after last night's intense Israeli airstrikes over the city, what is the situation right now?
Well, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people in Beirut were feeling fearful after the night that happened last night. The Lebanon's national news agency said that there were more than 30 Israeli airstrikes that hit the southern suburbs of Beirut. It's considered to be one of the worst nights of airstrikes since Israel expanded its attacks across Lebanon on the 23rd of September. There were reports of fireballs lighting up the sky over Beirut. And it's understood that the targets were a petrol station and a hotel near Rafik Hariri Airport, which is one of the only ways out for a lot of people in Lebanon. And so that's obviously creating some increased fear and unease among people here.
The Israeli army has issued evacuation notices for several towns in the south of Lebanon. Has there been a reaction from Hezbollah?
Well, you're right. The Israeli army issued evacuation notices for 26 towns across southern Lebanon. They ordered people there to evacuate immediately. We haven't seen an immediate reaction from Hezbollah. What we've seen today is an increased number of funeral notices for their fighters, acknowledging that they are incurring losses in the south. But the way that Hezbollah has positioned themselves with regard to the fighting that's happening, at least to their followers or to nervous people in Lebanon, is that this is a fight for them along Lebanon's southern border that will win the war, and that maybe there are some losses incurred along the way, but they are, in their own words, determined to have victory. And that's certainly a reaction that we're seeing also among some of the people who are displaced from the southern suburbs of Beirut.
Well, also, as we mentioned, the head of the United Nations Refugee Agency was in Beirut, and he talked about the tragic toll that the war has taken. More than 1 million people in Lebanon displaced so far. How is the Lebanese government coping with the situation, and is anybody helping these people?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the displacement crisis that is happening in Lebanon is enormous. It would be a lot for any government to deal with. People are pouring into Beirut. Many people are going north of Beirut as well. And you can see across the streets of the capital that there are people sleeping in the street because of this. The United Nations has said that almost 900 government-run schools that are being used as desperately underfunded makeshift shelters, that these are basically full at the moment. And so we see that the major brunt of this massive response is being borne by local community initiatives, by private citizens wanting to help. I've spoken to people who were sleeping in what was previously a nightclub, and the people running that nightclub said, we opened the doors to them because we wanted to make sure that these people weren't left sleeping in the open, sleeping on the streets. And so obviously some feeling about the fact that it is the community, it is the average person that is being pressured to do something to help these people rather than the government of Lebanon.
That was journalist Ruth Michaelson reporting from Beirut. Many thanks indeed. We appreciate it. And we can now speak to Arwa Danon. She's the president and founder of INARA, the International Network for Air, Relief and Assistance. She joins us from Beirut. Arwa, we know that your organization provides medical and mental health care to children in war zones. Can you tell us about what you're witnessing in the south of Beirut right now?
Well, we actually have been working in Lebanon since 2015. I was based here in my former position, my former life, sort of as a senior international correspondent for CNN. And so this is a country that I know very, very well. And what we are seeing across Beirut and a lot of these other areas where people are sheltering is this prevalent fear that continues to chase and haunt them. And that is because people here for the last year have been watching what has been happening in Gaza. And there is a sense that this is unlike any sort of Israel-Hezbollah war that has taken place before. This is not exactly what 2006 was. And they do feel as if this time around it is going to be much more violent. And in fact, it already has been much more violent because the death toll has by far surpassed the Israel-Hezbollah 2006 war. And they're also well aware of what happened in 2006, which is what saw the emergence of what's known as the Dahiya Doctrine, Dahiya being the South Beirut Hezbollah stronghold. And the Dahiya Doctrine is an Israeli military strategy that effectively calls for causing maximum civilian harm, be that harm to critical infrastructure or harm to civilians themselves. The logic being that the civilian population will then turn against the entity with whom Israel is going to war. But if we look at what happened post-2006, Hezbollah emerged even stronger than before. And it quite simply, many will say, is a strategy that just doesn't work. But it is a strategy right now that the Lebanese are very, very much on the receiving end of.
Well, as the Israeli army targets this Hezbollah stronghold in the south of Beirut, it is calling on civilians to evacuate from the area. But is it even possible for families to get to safety in the city?
Well, that's what's becoming increasingly difficult because the shelters are completely full. There's no infrastructure to be able to adequately house, feed, and provide for all of those who have been fleeing. We're talking about, around a quarter of the population here, 1.2 million people that have come under evacuation order. And we as aid organizations, we're scrambling. You receive supplies. We received, hundreds of mattresses, and we went out and, they're gone in a day because the need is so great and it's so widespread all over all of the country, especially when it comes to some of the sort of harder to reach areas like the Bekaa Valley, where I was earlier today trying to get mattresses to a couple of locations there. And one was a town that was housing 3,000 internally displaced people, but they actually only had 300 mattresses. So we were able to sort of supplement that a little bit. But the bottom line is, no, people don't necessarily feel safe in the locations that they are fleeing to because there have been bombings in areas where they would have thought that they would be safe. And also because shelter and humanitarian assistance, the whole system hasn't really sort of settled and begun functioning the way that it is meant to function because the space and the resources quite simply aren't there.
Well, even before this conflict, Lebanon was facing enormous problems, including a government that was not functional. So is there anyone who can offer help and protect the people of Lebanon? And how can the international community perhaps support the Lebanese government?
Well, when it comes to protecting the people of Lebanon from Israel, many here will tell you that there's only one country that can actually do that, and that is the United States, actually, using what needs to be done, using real pressure points to sort of rein in Israel's bombing campaign across this entire country and try to push forward some kind of a political resolution to all of this. There is no entity inside Lebanon that can actually guarantee the safety of the Lebanese people. And it's not lost on anyone that, Hezbollah falls outside of the armed forces of the Lebanese government, and yet is significantly stronger than the Lebanese army itself. But irrespective of that, there really is this sense that right now it's the Lebanese that have to stand up and come together for the Lebanese. And this is something that has been a bitter reality for decades now, really, to a certain extent, but especially in the last 5 years. Look, I've been coming to Lebanon constantly. I was actually based here for years. I've been coming in and out since 2003, but especially over the last 5 years, I've kind of watched the light ebb out of the eyes of, this population that is so much better known for its sort of joie de vivre and ability to withstand anything, because you had the 2015 complete and total economic collapse. You had the vast majority of the population's savings basically stolen by a corrupt political elite. You had the 2020 Beirut port blast, you had COVID, and now you have this. And it's basically, as a friend of mine was messaging me, especially after the pager and walkie-talkie attacks, she said, Arwa, what is this? This is like science fiction. We're in purgatory.
That was Arma Danon, president and founder of INARA, the International Network for Air Relief and Assistance. Thank you so much for all of your insights.